give me one shot here on a blue chip stock, believe me, Kevin, the only problem you're gonna have is that you didn't buy more.
Nobody knows if the stock is going to go up, down, sideways, or in circles.
NBA Draft Podcast. My name is Corey Tullivan, and I am here, as always, with my co-host, Albert Gim. Albert, what's going on, brother?
What's going on? It's good. It's good to record today. I had a wild day at work, but regardless of all that, we're talking about somebody very near and dear to my heart. So I'm super excited for this episode. I'm ready to rock, and yeah, man, I'm good to go. How are you doing, Corey? I never ask you how you're doing.
I'm doing well. The basketball team clinched a playoff spot last night, big win. So that was exciting. We're rolling over there, and we got about 2 weeks to prepare for the first playoff game because we still got a couple of games left in the season. So I'm doing well, and I'm excited because today we are going to cover a player that I think is being severely underrated in draft circles. There is a small faction of draft Twitter that appreciates this prospect, but in the mainstream, he hasn't really come around yet. So I'm talking about Davidson wing Hyunjung Lee. And Albert, you actually wrote a really, really fantastic article on Lee today for your Taking Out the Trash series over at No Ceilings. So I'm glad that we were able to catch a little serendipity on when we were recording and when you were writing. And I'm really excited to get into Mr. Lee's game because I think that there's a lot to like.
Well, first off, thank you for the plug. And thank you for the kind words. I actually had some people reach out today and they had a lot of really nice things to say. So I'm, for me, Corey, I've said this to you always, I feel so new to all this. And so even like writing about basketball still feels ridiculously new. So just having the opportunity to be able to write and then to be able to write about a player who is from Korea and he's going to come into the draft. And that's really, really exciting for me. So I'm ready to talk about it and I'm excited.
Let's fucking go. All right. So as we said, Hyunjung Lee is a Davidson wing. He's 21 years old right now. He'll be 21 on draft night. He is a junior. He's 6'7", 210 pounds. Went searching, couldn't find a wingspan. But if you just watch the tape, he doesn't look like one of the T-Rex arms guys. He looks like he's, at least got a 6'7", like at least it's even with whatever his height is, I believe. And I think it might be a plus wingspan even, which is good. Lee is averaging 16 points per game, 6.4 rebounds per game, 2.1 assists to 1.7 turnovers, only 0.1 blocks and 0.7 steals on the defensive end. But this is where Mr. Lee is going to, bread that butter. 48.1% from the field, 38.9% from three, 80% from the free throw line, true shooting 62.6. He's over 60% from twos overall. And these numbers are fantastic. You're looking at, almost 50, 40, 80. He was 50, 40, 90 last year as a sophomore. And these numbers are down and they're still, really, really efficient. So that's a positive sign. He has a PER 22.6 this year. And a little fun fact, his mother won a silver medal in the 1984 Olympics. So
that's crazy.
comes from an athletic family, which I think bodes well for, I know our guy Tyler Rucker always likes pedigree, guys who come from families of athletes, and Hyunjung Lee does as well. So that was a fun little fact I found. Stock prices, we're gonna be able to fly through this section here because preseason he was unranked virtually everywhere. Unranked on the No Ceilings Draftdaq PO. Currently, ESPN has him at 86 in their top 100, so that would be outside of the top 58 for the 2 rounds of the draft. But The Athletic, Sam Vecini, has him at 35. So shout out to The Athletic. Tankathon, he's unranked. Basketball News, he's unranked. Bleacher Report, unranked. No ceilings, he came in at 24 on our board. So he has an average price of 54 currently. So, you can say that he's a little bit more on the radar in draft circles. I remember he was somebody that, you were even talking about last year a bit, coming off a 50, 40, 90 season. So I'll be interested to see if he becomes a name to watch for as we near the draft, more so than now, when everyone starts really doing their research, because Hyunjung Lee he's worth your while. So I'll ask you, Albert, is his stock price too high, too low, or is it just right at 54?
Well, so I mean, my bias and with what I believe and what I've seen on tape, 56 feels way too low for me. But at the same time, Corey, I totally understand why that's the case right now. I think he's just somebody who's not on the radars of certain news outlets or people who are covering the draft, and that's okay. Like I think it's totally fine. We have guys who come out of nowhere late in the process, guys who can shoot up boards. I don't know if ESPN or Basketball News or any of these other outlets will ever have him in the top 58 that you need to get drafted this year, but it's okay. For me, I totally understand it, and I'm ready to kind of do some defending today. And be able to talk a little bit more about him so people get a better idea of who he is.
As am I. All right, so let's get into the scouting report a little bit, because I'm also a buy on this one. His stock is way too low, and if you're getting him in that spot of the draft, I think it's an absolute steal. So you started here with your article. It's the only place to start. It's where we usually do start with most prospects. Let's start with the shooting. All right, this is Lee's calling card. He is, I think, the best pure shooter in the class. So let's start with the off-ball shooting, because that's where he gets the most of his points from. So talk to me about the shooting a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with Lee is I feel like people are gonna watch highlights, and when they watch highlights, and eventually, if ESPN comes around and other outlets come around, they're gonna make highlights of him, and I feel like a lot of the highlights are gonna be him standing in the corner, catching and shooting. And I feel like that really undersells who he is as an offensive player. But as you mentioned, we want to start with the off-ball shooting. And I think with the off-ball shooting, the thing with him that I love so very much is that he's great at moving off-ball. He's a guy who utilizes screens really, really well. In his 3 years at Davidson, he's had a lot of opportunity to run around and run off screens, and he does a great job of that. And it's not, as I wrote in my article, it's not simply that he's, trained to run off these screens, but he does it with a lot of savvy. He does it with great timing. He does it with a lot of vision. And when I say vision, I think he really reads his defender, reads what the defense is doing and how they're playing him off of these screens. And he makes really good decisions, whether that's, flaring out to catch for, a off movement 3-point shot, or, if he sees that his defender is cheating a little bit, then he'll make a really nice cut to the basket. But in terms of his outside shooting, off movement, I love it, dude. I mean, of course, he's not perfect, but I really like it a lot. He can do it off balance. He could do it without having his feet fully set. Quick release. I wrote in my article, he does a little like weird thing with his right foot, but it's cool. I think that's just like that might be like a timing, like a balance thing for him. But yeah, for me, Corey, I just, there's so much to like about him as a shooter, and I'm excited for people to get into that. But also for the rest, for as we get into him as a prospect, there's going to be a lot more for us to talk about beyond just the shooting.
No doubt about it. And I love watching players like this. I think when I was in high school, I really kind of fell in love with JJ Redick's game. I saw him at the McDonald's All-American game that was in New York when I was in high school. I, saw him in the three-point contest in high school, and then obviously the hype of him going to Duke. I just loved watching guys who could run around the court and not have to dribble the ball at all, and they could still create a shot. And I think that, we're going to talk about like his self-creation ability, right? Because when you put the ball in his hands, he's not going to be like, hey, go get a bucket. That's not his game.
Right.
But that's not the only way to create your own shot. Like the fact that, you wrote in your article that he's assisted on almost 96% of his threes this year. That doesn't mean that he's not creating those looks. So
Right.
that stat almost feels a little bit misleading, because what he does and the way that he moves off the ball, if you're a fan of basketball, you love it, because you mentioned how savvy it is. He uses start stops. He'll run full speed, and then from one wing, and then he'll get to the opposite block, and he'll just stop for a second because there's somebody there for a screen, and then he'll look like he's cutting back in the same direction, but then he'll actually dart off that screen and pop out to the opposite wing. It's so fun to watch him because he's a master at his craft. And it's something that you really have to just have a feel for it. There's a reason that not every shooter can do it. There's a reason that not every player can move off the ball. It's a skill. It's really a skill because you have to read what the defense is doing. You don't want to go and clog up the space of dribble penetration or wherever your big is. You have to really have an understanding of what's going on in the offense. And, Davidson, credit to them, because they have he's not the only shooter on that squad, and they run some really, really good stuff to get him coming off pin downs and double staggers and just running floppy action both ways. And there's like this 5-out action that allows him to take advantage of this movement that he creates. But whether he's creating a ton of separation, I think a lot of times he's getting really clean open looks because he is so good at beating his man moving off the ball. But like you said, he could shoot it with a hand in his face too. And when you could shoot it with a hand in your face at 6'7", that's where the value is. He's not JJ Redick at 6'4". He's closer to Duncan Robinson, Joe Harris type height. And that height with his shooting stroke is one of the reasons I'm so bought into Lee as a prospect, because he's still going to get clean looks in the NBA due to his size and the way he moves. Now, I do think that sometimes this kind of basketball archetype, where you are relying on a lot of off-ball movement, I think there's a little bit of an adjustment period when you get to the NBA. I think you saw Corey Kispert going through it earlier this year, and now he's finally starting to kind of pick it up a little bit and get to his spots and feel more comfortable. I think that in college, obviously, like, you can do a lot of things to create that separation and get space, and you have a little bit more time to get your shot off. Although Lee's got a very quick release and it's a high release, so it's another thing I love about it. But eventually, these guys, they figure out the speed of the NBA game. They figure out the pace of it. They figure out, okay, I have to maybe zigzag a little bit more, or whatever the case is. They figure out how to get to their spots eventually. And to me, the way that Lee moves, he reminds me so much of the elite off-ball shooters in the NBA. So I am way in on it. It's a joy to watch, man.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you, Corey, and I loved what you said about, because we talked about the savvy of it all, right? And how that stat can be so misleading, right? The assisted percentage on all his shots. I'm with you, man. Like, you see the stuff that they run. And as you mentioned, like, not only do they run really good sets, but also their screeners do a really good job too.
Yeah.
I forgot the name of their big, but that dude sets some awesome screens. But even with that, like, you can have a guy who sets great screens, but if you don't have the savvy, and you don't use those screens well, Corey, you being a high school coach, I'm sure you teach your younger kids all the time. Like, you have to know how to use those screens well. You have to really brush up on those screeners. And
dude,
right,
we've accumulated more, and this is one of the best teams I've ever coached because we're just so good defensively. we've accumulated more moving screen turnovers this season than probably in my entire career combined. My
Jesus.
bigs, they play hard as hell. They got good feel. They just cannot set a screen for the life of them. So it's setting a good screen is certainly a skill. And you see, a big like Rudy Gobert. It's why Jazz fans go so hard for him, saying that
Yeah,
he's creating
screen
all these
assists.
screen assists, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely a skill. So shout out to Davidson's bigs because it's an unheralded skill
Right.
a lot of the time, right? And to buy into it, to free up shooters like this, it's a big deal.
Right. And then one last thing really quickly when we talk about his off-ball movement and stuff like that. Like even when you mentioned creation for him is a struggle. It's a big time struggle for him. He doesn't have a good handle at all. He does not have shake. He doesn't have a quick first step. But the thing that if you watch the first clip that I posted in my article today, they're playing Alabama and he gets absolutely just stonewalled by Jaden Shackelford. But in that possession, what was so smart is he gives the ball up and he resets himself right away. He's ready in the corner. He's ready for the catch. And then he just lets it fly and he bangs it. And it's just like, okay, right. No hesitation, hands in his face. But I just loved how he so quickly reset himself and was ready to shoot again. And I think that's the type of stuff that, as you mentioned, Corey, on the next level, you need NBA shooters to not just be good shooters, but to be able to get it up quickly and get it up with a hand in your face. And so that's why, once again, like as I wrote about, like that his shooting and his off-ball shooting and all that, the catch and shoot shooting, none of that feels theoretical to me. Like I feel like all of that is going to translate so well. And as you mentioned, with more experience in coaching and getting into an NBA program, his strength is only going to get better, in my opinion. So a big reason why I'm super high on him for sure.
Now, one of the things that allows him to get clean looks as a shooter, that makes him unpredictable, that makes all of that running around so hard to cheat. Because if you know that a guy is going to be running around a stagger screen, right, you might, and you can get away with it at the college level, you might not chase him. You might just cut it off and try to meet him at the spot. Now, Lee's a smart mover, so in a scenario like that, right, he'll flare out. If you go over the screen instead of chasing under, he'll just flare out to the corner, and now all of a sudden you have a new pass. But with that said, what makes him so dangerous is that he's so good at curling off these screens and making his way to the hoop. So again, he's creating shots for himself with his movement. It's not just outside shots. He's able to get to the hoop and get shot attempts at the rim where, in your article, he's finishing 78% on close twos. I mean, that's freaking phenomenal, man. It's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal number. Right. And it's a number that, like you said, I mean, his handle, I think, is reasonable, is how I would put it. Like he's not going to dribble the ball off his foot. He's just not going to break you down one-on-one, right? But if you did have him, in a ball screen or something, he's not going to dribble the ball off his foot. He's going to be able to dribble in a straight line, whatever. But he doesn't have to dribble to get points, and his curling off these screens, like when he comes off a double stagger from, going from the rim out to the wing, and somebody's chasing him because they need to meet him to block his 3-point shot, and then he curls right back and gets that little, off a face cut, whatever. It's beautiful to watch, and his size allows him to finish, around and through traffic too. It's not like he's getting wide open shots all the time at the rim. He's finishing. He can finish with his left hand. He can finish with his right hand. It's really smooth. It doesn't look awkward at all, and that's as pretty as getting open for the attempts outside the 3-point line, where he's really going to be looked at as a specialist. But the fact that he can actually, curl or cut back door and just beat guys all these other ways using the entirety of the half court is what another reason that I'm so high on his offensive potential.
Yeah, dude. I think the point that you just made about him curling to the rim, it's unbelievable. It really is unbelievable. As you said, him being 6'7", it really helps him around he has great touch around the rim too.
Yeah.
That has to be said. He has really, really good touch around the rim. The funniest stat that I found, I went into a deep dive on a lot of his stats. He has 0 dunks this season, which is cool. But it's okay. I mean, he doesn't have to dunk it for him to finish at the rim. A lot of savvy little layups. He, as you mentioned, it's not like he's open at the rim every single time. Sometimes the center's down there, and he's not afraid to take it up. And also, we're going to get into his passing a little bit later, but sometimes when the
Yes.
big does step out and he's there, he makes the right read and he can find the guy at the dunker spot. So he's a guy to me, Corey. Like, I'm so thankful to be doing this pod with you, because if it was just me kind of going on and on about him, it would sound disingenuous. But everything that you're saying, I'm with you. And for me, the curling that you just talked about is unbelievable. And as I mentioned before, he reads his man so well. And he reads the defense so well. He understands the spacing, and spacing in college basketball sucks. I mean, it's a freaking nightmare, but he navigates it so freaking well, and he's able to generate space in those tight quarters without the ball in his hands. I'm with you, dude, 100%.
Yeah, and look, you could fit him into any kind of offense you want to run because he doesn't need touches. He's gonna generate touches. One of the I just listened to the Draymond Green, JJ Redick podcast on Old Man and the Three, and Draymond was telling a story of like when Steve Kerr first took over. He kept preaching like ball movement, which was, different than what Mark Jackson was doing, which was a lot of high screen and roll, a lot of like hunting mismatches and whatnot. And Steve Kerr just really like keep the ball moving, keep the ball swinging. And it would get to Steph and he would scream at Steph to swing the ball and keep it moving. And Draymond was like, why, like, what the fuck are we doing here? Like, why do we not, like, that's who we want the ball to get the ball. And he was like, the ball, like the shots are going to find the guys who need to shoot the ball, right? So like if you keep the ball moving and you keep moving yourself, eventually you're going to be the one who finds the open shot. And obviously Steph's the best of all time, probably at all of this and the most lethal. So, I'm not predicting that Hyunjung Lee is going to all of a sudden have a Stephen Curry type effect on an offense, but I think that in that way, like he doesn't need touches and he'll figure out ways to be involved in the offense without having to have some crazy high usage. So you put him on any team and he's going to be able to have a positive impact on the offense with his shooting, his floor spacing, and the fact that he doesn't need to have the ball and the fact that he can still find opportunities to get to the rim. Now you mentioned his passing, and his passing is not something, again, he's not a high usage player, but so often in the NBA, we see these sets and we see shooters like Lee who are able to, figure out with the right partner a beautiful 2-man game that when these guys come off a DHO or, a little give and go and whatnot, like the big is going to hedge out when Lee's man is chasing. Right. So the big has to just hedge out a little bit so he doesn't get a wide open shot. And if you have a big who understands and dives to the rim there, like he's going to find him. Right. And Lee is as responsible as his teammates are for, the passes from the wing to other guys that are curling to the hoop. He's got great touch. He's got great timing. He leads his man to the spot. It's really, really fluid. He's not going to average 5 assists a game in the NBA. He won't have the ball in his hands enough to do it. But he's a guy, and you mention it, the word connector is a really popular term, and it's a good way to describe him because he will be a connecting piece. And you look at what JJ Redick had with DeAndre Jordan in LA,
right,
or Joel Embiid in Philadelphia. You look at what Duncan Robinson has with Bam in Miami, and I think that with the right partner, the right big man, Hyunjung Lee can do a lot of similar things coming off of all of these actions and be used as a passer to make, some really fun reads. So I'm very intrigued with his passing as well.
Yeah, man, I'm definitely with you. In preparation of my piece, I actually watched a ton of Duncan Robinson because for me, I really wanted to see how Lee's game could translate to the next level, because I imagine whoever ends up taking Lee, or if they get him as a undrafted free agent, they're
Right.
gonna want him to be that type of player, right? Running off screens, whatever, being a shooter. The
Yeah.
biggest thing that I noticed watching Duncan Robinson with Bam Adebayo, it's like 80% dribble handoffs, DHOs,
Yeah.
and Duncan Robinson does a pretty good job. But when I was watching him, it really made me think like, wow, if they were, whoever gets him, right, if they run Lee off of sets like that, he's actually going to be able to throw some really nice passes to the roll man or the strong side corner or the weak side corner, however the defense reacts to that roller. He's going to be able to make the right decisions. And that's the thing that's so interesting to me about him. Something that I didn't really get to mention a lot in my piece about him is I said he's a plus passer. He throws some really nice entry passes to the block too.
Mm.
He's not, it's like when I watch the Knicks right now, one of the things that just makes my blood boil, it's so hard for the Knicks to get a good entry pass into Julius Randle sometimes, right? But when I watch Lee, like sometimes he throws some really great passes to their big on the block, and it's so seamless, it's so accurate, it's so good. And then when they're running him off of these stagger screens, and then they've got a guy cutting to the basket on the weak side, he can make that pass with precision, with timing, with accuracy. It's awesome. And so Corey, I 100% agree with you. He's not going to be your main creator. I compared him to Chad Pennington in my article, which may not be the greatest comp ever because Chad Pennington's career was so. But I see it that way, where it's like, death by a million trillion little cuts. He's going to be able to make a lot of really solid passes that may not end up on a stat sheet, but is going to help the fluidity of your offense with high IQ and really good vision. So it's hard not to love his passing.
Yeah. It's, again, he's like, you could look at him and pigeonhole him as this one-dimensional guy, but he isn't on offense. He does so many things well that with a high IQ that it really lends itself to how the NBA game is played now, which is a lot of pass and move, a lot of read and react, a lot of obviously high volume shooting, and he does so well with it. With the passing, Corey Kispert did it really well with Drew Timme last year. I don't know if he has, that partner in Daniel Gafford in Washington necessarily. But like these guys who have the ability to make those reads coming off the handoff and then use that as a pick and roll opportunity to hit the dive man, like Lee's got that at the next level. And I think that Duncan Robinson is a really great guy for him to emulate in a role. And that's a bag that, Duncan Robinson got. So, it's out there. What exactly do you think on offense is going to be his biggest struggle in the league?
I mean, here's where we kind of get into the nitty gritty, right? As we mentioned, like self-creation is almost going to be a 0. Now, who knows, right? As you, Corey, I think if anything, you're almost more optimistic than I am in terms of that, where, I felt like his handle was kind of a nightmare, but you're right. You are right. He can dribble a little bit. And the biggest thing, something that you mentioned, Corey, that I don't even think I mentioned enough in my piece, he's such a high IQ player. And I don't know if it was, the way, as you mentioned with his mom, also great tidbit on his mom. That was something that I didn't even put in my thing. Shouts for you to doing the research on that. But you can kind of tell he grew up playing basketball from a very young age and was coached really, really well because of, like, do you remember on our Paolo episode, we talked about Paolo and his passing, and we said how he's like a feeler, and he's someone who's so cognizant of where his teammates are and how the spacing is on the floor. Lee's one of those guys, right? I think he's so intelligent, but there are severe physical limitations with Lee. There is some real stiffness with him that I think he's got to figure out, and he's got to start doing some 5 a.m. yoga. He's got to start doing some things to work on the stiffness because he's ridiculously stiff. He stands like a totem pole, like I wrote in my article. Wherever he goes, he looks like what's the Pickle Rick guy from Rick and Morty? He's just running around like one of those guys. So that's something that he's got to work on, but also he won't be able to create for himself, I think. And that's going to be a big thing where he's going to be a guy who's going to be almost solely reliant on another creator. Is kind of one of the big issues with him, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that is the issue, is that he doesn't have the self-creation. You know, the ball handling, to me, I'm not down on him as a ball handler. I'm definitely down on him as a ball handler who is trying to create offense for himself or his teammates. You know, like, I'm not, if you put him in a high ball screen, he's not going to dribble the ball off his foot, but he's also not going to set somebody up to lead them into the screen and hit a retreat dribble with a hard head. Like, he's not going to do any of the creative stuff. He's just not going to, again, dribble the ball off his foot. The handle, the stiffness, it's all stuff, like you said. I don't know if he'll ever fully improve on that aspect. But I do think with how, even though his body is fairly stiff, great posture on the guy, I don't know if that is going to hurt him on the offensive end, that he's a little upright. You know, I don't know. I think that he's a smooth guy, regardless of the stiffness. There's a little bit of contradiction in that, I guess, when you say it out loud. But like, you're not. It doesn't look like a struggle when he's like running around the court. You know what I mean? Like, he definitely knows what he's doing and he's fluid in it. But if you give him challenges for things that he's uncomfortable with, I do think it would look rigid and stiff. I'm actually pretty optimistic about his frame. You know, if he gets into a professional workout situation, like, I don't look at his frame and think like, this guy can't get stronger. Again, he's very big, so that bodes well for dealing eventually with NBA level physicality. He's not like a super high free throw attempt guy. You know, he's not bad because he does get, you know, attack the rim off movement fairly often. So I think he's shooting like 3 a game, which is, you know, decent enough for a guy who isn't like, for a guy with his skill set. But comparing him to a totem pole is, you know, definitely kind of funny. And but again, I'm not really worried about his impact on the offensive end, because what he does, he'll do well. He'll do it in a specialty kind of way. And, you know, even if he's a guy that isn't going to be a 30-minute per game guy down the line, I think for the minutes that he gets, he'll be fluid enough in doing his specific specialty on that end that if he doesn't improve any of that stuff, he'll obviously, you get to the NBA, your game improves, you work on it and everything. But like, let's say just the skills that he has improves enough, but he doesn't really necessarily improve on his weaknesses. I think that he'll be fine. And, you know, our friend Tyler Rucker, he wrote, you know, really, really great article that got a lot of traction at No Ceilings about, you know, some do's and don'ts of scouting, right? And one of the things, and this is definitely one of the things that I believe in as well, is figure out what a player can do, not what they can't do. And I think that's a little bit harder on the defensive end. If you can't defend, that is a problem. But on the offensive end, if you can figure out what makes a player successful and bring those skills out, what they can't do isn't necessarily as important, because you can hide it. So for me, for Lee, the offensive end, the weaknesses are weaknesses, but they're slight negatives that I'm not concerned about. Now, defensively, on the other end, you know, I actually want you to tell the story, and I want you to make the comparison, because I think it's really funny, and it's so out there when you're talking basketball, but it makes so much sense. Definitely for two guys who, you know, are from New York, and, you know, I know me, I'm Italian, so I appreciate, you know, Italian food in a very big way. I want you to tell the story about his defense and what you compared it to in your article today.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I mean, really quickly, just want to kind of go back to what I said before about the stiffness. I think what I was referring to is, I think because he's so upright and stiff, like the dream of him becoming like a self-creation guy feels really impossible, just because like I just don't know if he'll ever be able to cross anybody over, is what I was referring to. But yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said. Here we go. Let's talk about the defense, because, you know, for somebody who is so high on him, I feel like I was really fair I really tried to be critical and objective about him
Mm-hmm.
defensively, because I think there are some really glaring big issues with him as a defender. So to give you guys a little bit of the context and the story that Corey's referring to, if you haven't read the article, I tried to come up with some sort of comparison to Lee's effort, but also the results of that effort on defense. So in high school, I had a close friend of mine. I won't say his name, but him and his brother, his dad, his dad wasn't really in the picture. Mom was always working, but they lived with grandma too. And so grandma was this elderly Korean woman who had come over to the States not too long ago, didn't really know American culture or anything outside of like Korean culture, right? So the two boys would come home every day, and she would make them Korean food every damn day. It was like rice and kimchi and whatever, right? Some sort of soup, whatever. And so, my friend's older brother was kind of a troublemaker, a guy who was kind of known in our area as, a scary dude. He just got so fed up with his grandma and was like, I'm so sick and tired of eating the same thing every day. In Korean, grandma, you say 할머니, and he's like, 할머니, I'm sick of eating rice every day. And he's like all pissed off. And so he's like, can we eat something like, I don't know, like spaghetti? And so his grandma, being a loving grandma, she's like, okay, like, let me go to the market. So she goes to like a Korean supermarket, and, Korean supermarket, they don't just sell Korean food. So I guess she found like spaghetti noodles in one of these like random aisles where probably they also sell like cat food and other things. So she grabs a pack of spaghetti, and then her understanding of spaghetti was like, okay, it's like spaghetti and something red on top. It's like something tomatoey. So she bought ketchup. So she goes home, she boils the noodles, and she covers the spaghetti in ketchup, and she serves it to the two boys. His older brother, he takes a bite of it. He's like, what the F is this? And he like freaks out, right? He tosses his plate out. And then my friend just sits there because he's like the quote unquote good son, the golden
Sure.
child. He just sat there and ate the whole damn plate for his grandma because he loved his grandma. And
That's love.
RIP to her. She eventually passed away not too long after that. Well, I mean, a couple years after that. She didn't pass away because of the whole incident, but
Sure.
the comparison that I was trying to make is that Hyunjung Lee, like my friend's grandmother, puts incredible effort into his defense, but there are some serious issues with him as an athlete, as a really stiff human being. And if you go into my article, you'll see I put like maybe 5 clips of him getting absolutely roasted and toasted on defense. And a lot of it, as I wrote in my article, a lot of it comes down to him having incredibly slow feet. He has really stiff hips. Like when he's guarding a guard, if he gets switched up and he has to guard like a quicker point guard, they'll hit him with a crossover and it's over. Like you don't have to keep watching that play. They're going to go all the way to the cup and finish because he just can't shift his hips over and stay in front of them or like move his feet. And then also the guy, Corey, you said you're optimistic about his build. I appreciate you for that. But right now he's a little thin. As I wrote, he is not a disciple of Jose Canseco. He is lacking some severe bulk there. So if you combine slow feet, super stiff hips, and not a lot of strength, he gets destroyed sometimes on defense, is kind of what I think very fairly put there in my article. And if he ever reads it, and I think he might, because I know somebody who's very close to him, so he may end up reading this, and I hope he doesn't hate me for it. It's all love, right? Constructive criticism is where I'm coming from, but it's deserved, and I think it's very deserved.
Yeah, it was very fair. I think that, like you said, the effort's there, but sometimes there's ketchup on it. And you want some marinara, some bolognese, maybe a little bit of Alfredo, and maybe some vodka. Throw some vodka sauce in there, but it's ketchup sometimes. And that, look, NBA defense is important, and he's never going to be one of these big wings who are going to guard multiple positions and you're going to be able to throw him on Kawhi Leonard or Jimmy Butler. That's not going to be his game. And coaches are going to probably I don't know if I'll say hide him, but they're going to have to work with him in the
Right.
defense. I think that off the ball, it's a much different story. I
Yes.
think that he's a really good rebounder. And his height, again, like it all comes back. If he was a 6'3" prospect with the same numbers,
Mhm.
I'd be a little less in on him being an NBA player. But he's got legitimate size. He finishes possessions with rebounds. He's in the right spots. I think that irregardless of his lack of strength, the fact that he can put his hands up and
Yes.
contest shots near the rim, it's still challenging to finish over him because he's a big dude. And like I said, earlier, even though I don't have measurements for his wingspan, I don't think it doesn't look like he has a negative wingspan. So,
Right.
he looks like he's got the standing reach and the size to at least make things a little difficult near the rim. Now, he doesn't get a lot of blocks. He doesn't get a lot of steals. He's not going to be, he doesn't have that quick twitch burst to anticipate a pass and all of a sudden he's off to the races getting a dunk. Obviously, he has 0 dunks this year, right? Like, that's not his game. But if you're talking about, is he going to be in the right spot on the weak side? Yeah, he's going to have his feet in the paint cheating. He's going to split the difference when he has to. He's going
Correct.
to rotate. He's going to be able to, okay, if, the ball handler is on the wing and the man who's guarding the guard at the top of the key goes to throw a quick double at the wing, he's going to rotate and be at the nail, waiting for this guy to rotate it in case the ball swings back to him, right? He knows where to be. And to me, that is an integral part of what is going to allow him to be on an NBA floor, because one-on-one defense in the NBA is the hardest thing ever. You have the best players in the world who have all of the space and freedom to do whatever they want to, right? Like, with the way that guards shoot it now, we went from playing 15 feet and in to what it like 47 feet by 50 feet or something, like, and you have to guard all of it. So to be able to guard a guy on an island, like, it's really hard to do that. There's very few guards who are capable, or wings, that are capable. But you got to be able to be on a string on defense and not break the chain when the ball's swinging around. And I do think he'll be good enough to be able to handle that part of defense.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. I think, especially off ball, that's where the intelligence comes in. As you mentioned, he
Yeah.
gets to the right spots. He makes the right reads. As you mentioned, he knows how to get in the paint. And to his credit, there are times, as you mentioned, well, he'll try to wall up. He'll try to stay vertical. He'll try to contest some shots down there. He's averaging 6 rebounds a game, which, considering his frame and what he's asked to do, I think those are pretty good numbers. And you see it on tape. Like, he's not afraid to go get down there and mix it up, even though he's lacking strength. But it's just the on the ball stuff can be pretty terrifying. I purposely, honestly, for me, like, I purposefully put some really bad clips in there because I
Yeah.
wanted people to understand that I'm very objective about him. But then again, at the very end, I put one clip there where he did do a pretty good job against St. Joe's. He was moving his feet. He looked a lot smoother. He contested at the rim without fouling, stayed vertical. And so I just, I'm with you, Corey. I don't think
He
he'll
has
ever
his
be a
moments.
plus defender.
He does have his moments. He has his moments,
Yes.
and the effort. Defense is about effort, and if you put in effort, you're
Correct.
going to get stops. You're not gonna.
Yeah.
Sometimes good offense is better than good defense, and you don't want him on a quick, shifty point guard. But he
Yeah.
is going to be able to keep a guy in front of him enough that he's not just going to be a bullfighter or whatever. What's the saying that's escaping me?
Revolving door?
That we'll use that
Turnstile?
one. And,
Okay,
yeah. Clyde's got some, some saying I'm forgetting. I was trying to use.
Matador defense. That's what it
Yes,
is.
matador defense. He's not a matador on defense. I mean, with quick shifty guards he is, but I don't think he will be for the majority of people that he will be covering.
Agreed.
And early on as a rookie, yeah, that a lot of rookies get hunted for switches and whatever, but eventually, I think if he plays in the league for a long time, he'll be adequate enough and his shooting will be valuable enough that you can live with the defense. And he's a specialist. Now, a lot of people, and if you're listening this deep in, you might be one of the people on the side that's optimistic. You might be on the less optimistic side. You might see a guy who has limitations and you just don't think there's a spot for him. You don't think that he's draftable necessarily. And here's my thing. I tweeted out today a little question. And because I was having trouble figuring out and finding examples myself. What I was looking for was examples of players that were around 6'7", high volume, elite movement shooters who, for whatever reason, didn't pan out in some capacity in the NBA. And this is the list that I got. Justin Jackson, Carolina, right? Now, Justin Jackson was never an elite shooter in college.
Yeah.
He had a good year, but his free throw percentage was, I believe, sub 8, right? And it was 1 year. Aaron Naismith also had an outlier year, his second year. It was on like 11, 12 games. And he showed some flashes at the end of his rookie year, and it's early. Boston has been a disaster for most of the year. Inconsistencies, role, right? Coaching doesn't seem like, he's thrilled with the way the roster is constructed. I wouldn't give up on Aaron Naismith in year 2 of his career in a weird situation. Clay Anthony Early was thrown out there, which I thought was a weird one. Shout out Mavs draft. Never an elite shooter. Was a good shooter his last year, but again, he's not one of a guy that if you're like, what is Clay Anthony Early? How would you describe him?
He's more of a bucket getter. Yeah.
Yeah, it was never like a pure shooter. And
correct.
Look, I don't think he was good for the Knicks, but his career was almost cut short when he was involved in a shooting. He got shot. So I don't think he ever recovered from that in a way that he was able to play basketball. Nick Stauskas was one, right? Now Stauskas is a pretty good example. Stauskas he's shorter, probably 6'4", 6'5". Stauskas was pretty phenomenal his last season at Michigan. Like his numbers were pretty insane. But even Stauskas bounced around enough, and he was drafted in the lottery ahead of Klay Thompson, right? So that is also like when you're looking at, are you drafting somebody in the lotto? You're drafting somebody at the back end of the first round, or even getting them as an undrafted free agent. So those were the majority of the names I got. I don't know how many names there. Oh, I also got Adam Morrison. Was another one thrown out. Morrison had I don't want to say underrated rookie year, but he was okay enough. Like he shot pretty poorly for a rookie, but he was a rookie in a situation. He got drafted 3rd overall coming off that Gonzaga season. But Morrison was another guy, like he didn't have the shooting numbers you thought he had throughout the entirety of his career. He just went nuclear his last year at Gonzaga, where he was getting like compared to Bird, because he had a weird mustache. But now let's look at a lot here. I have a list of guys that are like in the NBA currently.
Okay.
Duncan Robinson.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the blueprint for Lee. If you're looking on how does he succeed. Desmond Bane. Now Desmond Bane is also, he's got a little bit more of his bag, but he's been phenomenal. But he does have a lot of that movement shooting, the off ball stuff, the curling to the hoop. Joe Harris. Got a bag. Obviously, he's been hurt, and news came out today that he might need another surgery, but Joe Harris took him a while, but he found a real role. Max Struss.
Yeah.
Found a role in Miami. And he was a little bit more of like a bucket getter in college too, but he went to Miami, and now he's like this, big time shooting threat. He's found a home. Svi Mykhailiuk. bounce around a little bit, but
Yeah.
he's got a role in the league. Doug McDermott.
That's the one for me. Yeah.
Now, McDermott, if you actually look at that draft, you can argue that he did not get drafted too high. The price that the Bulls paid to move, the price that the Bulls paid to move up to get him was a lot, but the actual spot in the draft, if you go through, it's around where McDermott probably should be, because McDermott's still playing in the league, and he's a good NBA player.
Correct.
Davis Bertans.
Yeah.
A little overpaid. Had a contract year. Not a big part of the Wizards' future, I'm sure, or a very big part because they probably can't move him. But Bertans was good in San Antonio, obviously had big moments with Washington, needs the right situation, but the guy is obviously a player. Garrison Matthews, caught on, found a home in Houston. Matt Thomas, who's probably one of the shorter guys on this list, getting minutes in Chicago. A lot of Bulls fans hate him. I think that he brings enough as a specialty shooter to be valuable in some of the minutes he plays. And then you got a guy like Corey Kispert who's starting to come on, get more comfortable.
Right.
I think he'll be a valuable role player. Then you have other guys like you have a Chris Duarte, a Luke Kennard, a Kevin Huerter. I think those guys all have more off the bounce game than these guys. So I don't think they're exactly the same in role, but my point is, I feel like there's a lot more. There's way more examples in recent history of guys that shoot it at the caliber that Hyunjung Lee shoots it, that are successful in finding roles in the NBA. Then there are guys that aren't working, that aren't working out, and the guys that I listed that are working out, maybe it's not happening all the time at their first location, but they're guys that are valued and that eventually catch on, because eventually they land in a spot where a team will just be like, shoot a three every time you get it, like launch like 10 threes per 100 possessions or whatever the stat may be. Just go in there and be a gunner and in that specialty role. And it's a reason why a guy like Justin Jackson is still getting opportunities, because he's looked at as a potentially like one of these guys who could space the floor as like a long wing. And he's not that. He isn't that elite shooter, but he's still getting that opportunity. Hyunjung Lee actually is an elite shooter, and he has elite skills on that end to thrive in that role. So for me, I look at all of these guys and I say, why can't that be Hyunjung Lee?
Yeah, dude. Corey, I'm with you. And you want to hear something really interesting? A lot of those names that you brought up were in the same draft class. When you talk about the guys who are like both good and bad, you mentioned Clanthony Early, Joe Harris, guys like Rodney Hood, Gary Harris, James Young, what's that guy? Adrian Payne, Doug McDermott, Stauskas. They were all in the 14 draft, which is a really interesting thing to look at, because that draft was filled with guys like, the prototype you're talking about, guys who are supposed to be shooters, guys that, teams thought were going to be able to space the floor and do certain things. Maybe I always kind of liked Adrian Payne. I always wondered what happened with him. I think he's playing in the Big Three now, so it kind of sucks.
Well, he was actually listed in like the replies of my tweet, and somebody was like, Mav Draft listed him, and I don't think he was more of like a power forward who was like a picking, like floor spacing big more than like a movement shooter.
Correct.
But somebody like hopped in and they were like, I'll tell you exactly why he's not in the league. He was in my class in college at Michigan State, and he was a dick. And I can't imagine that anybody liked him. So that's probably why he's not in the league anymore. I don't know. Adrian Payne, maybe he's a good dude. Maybe he's like a good hang. I don't know. But this dude did not seem to think that, who went to school with them at Michigan State.
But that's freaking hilarious. But if you look at that draft class, even like a guy like James Young, do you remember how excited Bill Simmons was when the Celtics
Yeah.
took James Young? You know, like there was
Yeah.
this thought that he would be that level of a shooter. Rodney Hood. Now, Rodney Hood's a good example too. Like Rodney Hood, of course, does a little bit more than Hyunjung Lee. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's a 1-for-1, but
they're a
Hood's a
little
shooter.
they're different roles.
Right.
You know, it's
Right.
like you're looking for more of like a wing scorer
Yeah.
than a wing, than the shooting role that these other guys kind of play as movement shooters. Like, yeah, you can run Rodney Hood off actions, but like when he was coming out of Duke, you wanted him to be more, right? You wanted him
Yeah.
to be the guy who can maybe run some pick and roll, who can attack downhill. And
Correct.
Rodney Hood was a good player before he got hurt. Like he was a good enough player that he was like, you know, you could put him in a rotation. He was pretty okay. But I don't want to say he didn't live up to expectations because I think he went like 18th in the draft or something. You know,
Yeah.
I remember him falling in the draft. But James Young's another guy. You know, he had that big game in the tournament, and he looked like one of these guys who's just going to be like a bucket in the league, and he could never figure out the shooting. And that's kind of my point. Like sometimes the shooting indicators aren't real.
Correct.
And some of these other guys, there were signs. Like a lot of these guys shot in the 70s from the free throw line. And while they might have been at 40 for a year, like Hyunjung Lee he's been shooting this way every year in college. Like he is a shooter. Boy's got a strap. You know, it's not theoretical. You don't have to project. You don't have to hope that it'll improve. He's a shooter. So that's why I'm optimistic. And it's why I have him as a top 30 prospect. That's the reason. I think that when you look back at wherever he goes, he might get undrafted. He probably will. You know, I think that, you know, and I'm sorry if this is going to be a little too woke for anybody, but I do think the fact that he's Korean, I think people don't necessarily take him as seriously if he was a white dude who played at Gonzaga or something. I just don't.
Right.
I just don't think. I think that's part of it. I think that it sucks, but you could still go to LA Fitness, and if there's an Asian kid at the pickup, they'll still make Jeremy Lin jokes, right? Like that is just an unfortunate reality of how shitty people could be. And I think that there's not anything like, I don't think it's like a purposeful like thing where they're holding it against him. I think it's almost like something that's in the back of somebody's mind that they're not even realizing that they're projecting. I don't know if that makes sense, but I truly believe that like he's being really underrated in this class, and there's a number of factors, and maybe it's just because we had somebody on the No Ceilings YouTube channel being a moron in the comments about it, but I do think that's a little part of it. But I think his resume stacks up, and I think if you look back, you're going to be hard pressed to find a number of guys who are going to end up being more helpful to an NBA team than Lee is with his skill set, even if he's only a specialist.
Right. And Corey, I do want to say my hope ultimately for Lee is that some NBA team decides to follow the No Ceilings NBA model. Now, the parallels are real. You know, our No Ceilings NBA team, we're a team with a lot of white writers, and our team of white writers took a chance on a Korean dude who has no basketball background, and here I am doing pods and writing articles with our team. And in the same way, I really do hope that an NBA team will look at him for the player that he is, like you said. I think we've talked for the last, close to an hour now about the things that he can and cannot do. And I think the argument that you laid out just now about all these guys who've panned out in the league and the very few guys who haven't, and, there are a lot of different variables, right? But for me, I really do believe that there's a path for him to be a really good NBA player. I would never, ever argue that he's going to be an all NBA guy. He'll probably never make an all-star team. But that's okay. You need guys in the league who can play a role, who know their
100%.
role, who can like Bill, I was listening to his pod today. He was talking about like Grant Williams and how much Grant Williams has improved and how he's kind of like a really important commodity now to the Celtics, where he realized, oh, okay, I'm going to play defense and shoot corner threes. And he went to the gym and became a really good corner 3-point shooter. I think from day one, Lee's going to know his role. And I'm just hoping a team takes a good bet on him, because I think he's going to be a good NBA player.
I agree. If we're trying to maximize his value in the league, what teams do you think would you be most excited for him to go to? That would like really, if you invested in him, you're like, this is how I'm going to get the most out of this.
Well, from what I understand, he's a big Warriors fan. So
Mhm.
that would be cool for him to end up on that team. And I think Draymond would be like, dude, I don't give a shit what you look like. If you can shoot the ball, I'm going to set you up. And Draymond, I think, would be really cool about that and do a great job of taking him under his wing even, and even toughening the kid up. Although Koreans are notoriously tougher than we look. So I will say that. Also, as you mentioned, now I know they have Duncan Robinson, but that type of system, right, where they really value shooting, and they don't just expect shooters to just shoot, but they set up their shooters to be successful. I think that's a really interesting situation as well. So any team like that, I think, would be a great fit for him, where he could go in and be who he's meant to be, and is valued for what he can offer an NBA team, but will also work on him and his warts and his weaknesses and try to develop him into a more, holistically good NBA player.
I really think he would be fun in Denver with Jokic. The way that he even cuts to the rim, and just I think Jokic would. There's not anybody in the league better that would like be able to find him in all of the spots that he, and just that would be perfection. I think Utah would be interesting. I think their system is pretty. They like to jack up shots and keep the ball moving. I think Memphis would be fun too. Memphis is the amount of, you can never have enough shooting around somebody who creates so much attention in the paint as Ja does. And Ja is such a phenomenal passer. So to be able to kick out to elite shooters like that with him and Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr., like I think the spacing would be phenomenal there. But like I said, I think that any smart team will be able to find a role and a value in somebody who could potentially be an elite shooter. All right. If you're buying stock in Lee, who may you have bought stock in previously?
This was, I feel like all the guys that I thought of, you already mentioned. I'll be totally fair.
All of the shooters.
To be totally fair, though, I even thought of Nick Stauskas, because I might be the only one on planet Earth who thinks this, but I still don't understand why Nick Stauskas isn't in the league. I feel like he is such a good shooter. I still think he's like, 28, 29? He should be somewhere jacking up threes, because Corey, you may disagree with me, or actually, no, I think you will agree with me. Like Stauskas had a little extra to him. Like I remember he had like a little handle to him. He could do a little bit more. He could even take it to the cup. I looked it up. He's actually legit 6'6".
Yeah, that's interesting.
So
dude, he was a bad motherfucker in college. He was.
He just, you know what it is. He started off with, the wrong button on his shirt, dude. He ended up with the Kings, and it just kind of tanked from there. But I still think he could have worked out. But I thought of Stauskas. Of course, I thought of Davis Bertans, except, I watched a ton of Davis Bertans this week for Lee too. And it's just like, no, I think there are big differences there, because Bertans can't pass for his life, dude. That dude is not a good passer, at least from the stuff I've been watching. And
Bertans pretty one-dimensional, I think.
He is. So those are some guys that I thought about. I couldn't really think of an exact one for one. I couldn't even think of someone from the 90s that I really liked. So
yeah. I think he's got a little McDermott in his game. I think he's got a little bit of Duncan Robinson in his game. I think with these shooters, the archetype is so specific that you can really make the argument for any one of these guys, and I think you kind of hit on it. All right, look, nobody should ever have to do this segment more than you. This is your guy in the draft. This is the big segment of the show. It's time to sell me this pen on Mr. Hyunjung Lee.
Well, first off, Corey, I think it's time Uniball or Pilot or one of these pen companies you guys need to give us a call, or maybe it's Apple with the Apple Pencil or whatever.
Ooh,
you guys need to call and freaking sponsor us, because this is one of the most this is one of the most sponsorable segments we've got. But here we go. I want to sell you on Hyunjung Lee, and it's pretty simple. I say this almost for every prospect, but it comes down to this, right? The NBA loves shooting, right? There is a deep, powerful love affair and fetish when it comes to shooting. Maybe I shouldn't have used the word fetish, but it's fine. Okay, we'll keep it moving. The NBA loves shooters. Smart NBA teams love shooters. Hyunjung Lee was a 50, 40, 90 guy in his sophomore year last year. This year, on higher volume, he lost, their main guy in Kellen Grady going to Kentucky. He's bearing a much bigger burden on his shoulders offensively, and he's still shooting the lights out. He's got really, really good percentages. And as we mentioned, I love the McDermott comp that you made, because he's great at cutting to the basket, finishing at the rim. There are more dimensions to his game. So if you're an NBA team that's looking for a lights out shooter who's also 6'7", who's not afraid to attack the boards, a guy who can really connect things for you on the floor. One of the big draft terms nowadays is if you've got a heliocentric creator on your team. Hyunjung Lee is a great moon for that heliocentric creator. He's a guy who is going to be able to space things out for you, hit tough jump shots, be in the right places on both sides of the floor. He's going to be a winning player in my eyes. Once again, he's not going to be an all NBA guy, but if you're a team in the second round, late first, and you need a shooter and a guy who is going to increase the skill level on your team, take Hyunjung Lee.
Let's fucking go. Let's go. Look, I'm really happy we did this episode. Lee's one of my favorite prospects to watch because I appreciate beautiful ball movement. Taking out the trash is always a joy to read because you do such a wonderful job of melding pop culture, which I love, with basketball prospects. I got to be honest, I haven't gone beyond the second Fast and Furious. Maybe I saw the third one. I don't know. But one of these days, it's going to be one of the things I just commit to and watch all of them. You wrote about how the fifth installment reminded you of the fifth movie. I was lost a little bit. I didn't watch any of the clips because I don't want anything spoiled. But if you like Fast and the Furious, you should read. And you like Hyunjung Lee, you should definitely read Albert's piece at noceilings.substack.com. I hope we did his episode justice because he deserves a little bit more shine.
First off, Corey, I just want to thank you again. Like I said, people may think I said all this in jest, that I was just kidding or whatever, but Corey bet on me about a year ago, a guy who's an absolute nobody who just had a Twitter account. And now I get to write articles for our unbelievable website. And guys, if you're not subscribed to our No Ceilings newsletter, I don't know what the F you're doing, bro. Like, our team of writers are unbelievable. And the fact that I get to write with these guys is such an honor for me. When it comes to the Taking Out the Trash column that I do bi-weekly, it really is for me to be an idiot and talk about prospects that I like, and also just infuse the random pieces of pop culture and the cultural zeitgeist of the time. And it's a weird thing that I do. And I'm thankful for all the people who decide to click on my articles and read them, because a lot of it feels like nonsense, but I'm thankful for the opportunity. I hope Hyunjung Lee, I hope you read it. I hope you listen to the pod, because we've got a lot of love for you. And, in a lot of ways, we're trying to get him on people's radars, because I think he deserves to be on people's radars. We think that he deserves the publicity. Also, you guys should know at No Ceilings, I'm not the only one who's high on him. Corey's high on him. I know Nick's really high on him. I know Metcalf's really high on him. I know Alex is really high on him. So I mean, some of our guys have him higher on their boards than I do. So this isn't just an Albert thing that's going on our website that I'm very thankful for. And yeah, man, I'm very proud of the column. I'm really proud of this pod, and I hope he hears it, and I hope he gets the praise and the credit that he deserves.
You know, it's almost a year now that you mention it, and I just looked. February 12th was our first episode, so we're actually coming up.
That's crazy.
On a year. It seems like next week's episode is going to be the 1 year anniversary pretty much. So maybe we'll have to figure out a way to do something fun with the 1 year anniversary show. But look, thank you everybody for watching on YouTube. Thank you for, watching on Spotify. Thank you for listening anywhere that you listen to it. This podcast has grown so much since that first episode. It's crazy how many people do listen to it. We've been the number one basketball podcast in multiple countries, which is insane. We've been, I think, in the top 15 in America of all basketball podcasts, as an independent podcast. It's really, really fun. It's really fun to see. And, I've had a lot of cool stuff happen to me through basketball, and every time something cool happens, it feels surreal. And every time we get to do this podcast and I see, it pop up in a player, it still feels surreal. And, getting to do this with you has been a lot of fun, dude. So tell the people where they could find you on the internets.
You can find me at Alberto Gim. Toe is spelled Toe, like the toe on your foot. You can also find me at GTG NBA. GTG stands for Garbage Time Gim, is where you can find me.
And you can find me at Corey Tulaba on Twitter, the NBA Draft Dude on YouTube. And you can find both of our work at noceilings.substack.com. You will get free content delivered to your email daily, right to your inbox, just Monday through Friday. Dope ass team of writers. This week I wrote a piece about got into a little bit of draft philosophy, wrote about what would Masai do when looking at a prospect. Is this somebody that Masai Ujiri would target? And kind of that might be the direction of the league one day, just playing a bunch of dudes that are 6'7". Hyunjung Lee is 6'7". He might fit in. So make sure to read that article. Make sure to read Albert's article. Make sure to read Tyler Rucker's article on do's and don'ts of scouting. Nathan Grubel from Draft Deeper, wrote a rookie ladder for us this week. We've been on fucking fire, NBA Jams style, man. So thank you for listening to the podcast. Like, subscribe, share, all that good shit. We appreciate y'all. We out. Peace.
Peace.